All right, good morning. Welcome to the session of transitions class where we're going to be talking about growing up and growing older. I feel I feel like we're heading where angels fear to tread at 100 miles an hour because we're going to try to hit your entire life in 1 hour. So we're just going to hit the high points. There are lots of transitions that happen throughout our lives that have to do with aging and us growing up or growing older. And we're going to hit the major things, hopefully. And we're very thankful that Jack Young is going to help us with this class. So I'm anxious to hear the good things that he has to say. So Marcus and I will hopefully get you to adulthood, and then we're going to hand it over to Jack. All right. So just a question to start us off with. Is there a particular stage of life that you feel like is idealized in our culture, or that you maybe have idealized in the past, that you think, oh, this is the time of life when we're the prettiest, or we're the strongest, or we're the richest, or the smartest, or anything like that? Like, do you feel like there's a time of life that is idealized? Any ideas?
I really had fun in my teenage years, and I always look back at those thinking, oh, I think I want to go do that again.
Okay, so teenage years.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, Rebecca thinks, yeah, teenage years. Maybe everything after that is just downhill, is it? Or
Then you hit that strike when you get older and people look at the 80s and 90s and people that hit 100, they go, wow, look at that. And I think, wow, I don't want to be there.
Right. Okay. Yes, Gary?
For me, it was 30 because I was an adult, but not old.
Right.
Adult. Yeah. Powerful. It really was good.
Right. Right. Good. So, yeah. So 30 because you're still young enough to do what you want to do, but you're old enough to be calling your own shots. Maybe is that? All right. Good. So yeah, great. I just wanted to bring this up because I think sometimes when we idealize a certain time of life, then sometimes we resist a transition out of that time of life, or if we're afraid of a certain time of life, we resist a transition into that time of life. And I think that sometimes we can actually kind of miss out on the next time of life if we're resisting it because we're afraid of it. And really, I think every time of life is something that God has given us to contribute toward the creation of our character and the nurturing of our relationship with Him. That I think in every stage of life, He has things that He wants us to learn. And it's not that one stage of life maybe is better than another. It's just that they're all going to contribute to the person that we're going to become and to the relationship with Him that we're going to have. And so, but sometimes we can get an idea that, oh, like that. I hear some people say the 20s, I'm just going to be 29 for every birthday from now here on out, and just totally not age, or something, because the 20s are the best. It's downhill from here or something. And it's not necessarily true, because I think God has something for us in every stage of life. We wanted to point to a psalm here that actually talks about aging a little bit. And it's Psalm 90, and we're just going to hit two little parts of the psalm, but you can read the whole psalm later if you want. But it starts out talking about the eternity of God and who He is. Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. And so we see God as the eternal home of His people, the one who doesn't change, who is from the beginning to the very end. He is God. And then that's contrasted with ourselves. This is later on in the psalm. Our days may come to 70 years or 80 if our strength endures, yet the best of them are but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass and we fly away. If only we knew the power of your anger. Your wrath is as great as the fear that is your due. Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. And so here we have humanity, which is contrasted with God, who is our eternal home. Humanity, where our days go so fast. And a lot of them are full with trouble. And so the psalmist is asking God to teach us to number our days so that we can gain a heart of wisdom. I have a friend who said he used to visit a graveyard every birthday to remind him that he wasn't going to be here forever, that he should use his time wisely and well. He says he doesn't have to do that anymore because now if he wants to remind himself of his mortality, he just jogs. But, but he felt that numbering his days would give him a heart of wisdom. So why would numbering our days help us to gain a heart of wisdom? Any ideas? I have some ideas on the next slide, but does anybody have an idea why the psalmist would ask God to help him to number his days?
Does that mean realize that it's finite and that every day contributes to the whole story, the memories,
Right.
thanking other people and all that? So if we all lived our
Mhm.
lives that way every day,
Mhm.
it'd be a much better world.
So that every day matters, that we should live our lives in a way that helps us to realize that every day really does matter. Any other ideas? I have some here. We're going to rip through this because I really want to give Jack his full time here. So help us to live fully in the stage of life that we're in. I talked to a young adult in preparation for this class, and she talked about how many people that she sees struggling with kind of wishing they were in a different stage, maybe. And she's felt like a skill that she thinks is valuable is knowing how to live fully in the stage that you're in. And then when you get into the next stage, live fully in that stage. And not always be wishing it away, but to really take advantage of the lessons that God has for you where you are at the stage of life that you're in. And so help us to invest in knowing God, because we saw at the beginning of that psalm that God is our eternal home, right? And we are temporarily here. And our life is about coming to know and coming to live in that eternal home that is Him. And so that can help us to invest in knowing Him and to treasure the relationships while we have them. And then, of course, as a mom of kids, I hear that about every week. Someone telling me, enjoy them while they're home because they won't be there forever, right? And I think that there's some truth to that we should enjoy the moment while we're in it. Not that I haven't occasionally had daydreams of the empty nest, but that while we have those relationships, knowing that that's not always going to be the way it is, that people do grow up, that people do grow older, that things do change. And so we should enjoy what we have while we have it. Help us to accept the next stage when it comes. And I think that that's something that's so important, is knowing that it's natural and normal that we are going to grow up, we are going to grow older, and that's that numbering our days, I think, helps us to realize that that is the design, that is the way it's supposed to be, and that we just need to learn from where we are and when we're there, and help us to accept our physical frailty, that we are going to die if Jesus doesn't come back, and each and every one of us. And our dependence is on Him for eternity. He is the eternal one. And we have to trust Him for that life that we want to have. And so I think that all of those things can help us to gain a heart of wisdom when we number our days.
I have one to add.
Yeah, go back.
Oh, yes, please do.
Could you go back a little bit?
Okay.
How about learning to recognize your own mistakes and errors?
Learning to recognize your own mistakes and errors.
Once you do, you're not supposed to be
Okay, yes, unless you recognize your mistakes, then you're going to really stagnate, right, in your relationship with God. That's good.
Right, that's good. And can you just stay there for a second?
Yep, maybe
No? Oh, yeah, okay, sure. Yeah, one thing that makes age transitions different than any other kind of transition is age transitions are more inevitable than any other, as far as I can think of. And so embracing it is very important. I mean, there's no way we can avoid anything, right, as far as age transitions. So every day we're making age transitions. So so definitely just embracing it and accepting it and making the most of it. And, I like the way the psalm puts it, number your days. I think most commentators maybe put the emphasis on the end of life. But it doesn't necessarily say the end of life. I think it's important at every stage of life to use every moment for God and to pray that God will show us how we can make a difference in the world today. It's so easy for us to spin our wheels and really not make progress in the world and in the church and in our own lives. We have so much potential, right? And so much that we want to do for God, and so much we want to see happen for God all over the world. And we need to pray, and we need to try and seek God and love Him and be filled with His Spirit every moment, every day, because doing our age transitions well is going to be a key to being productive and useful for God's kingdom, right? Because every moment we have to adjust. One way to look at age transitions is it's hard because you're leaving everything you've ever known and you're going into something that you've never experienced before, right? And we need God for that, and it's an opportunity. It's a huge opportunity, right, to really become what He wants us to be. So this is just an introduction to the one side of your page. For those of you who don't have a piece of paper, maybe running out. If I'm running out, then I'll try to add more later. And here's some pens. So maybe I can let someone take care of that, and I'll go print out a few more in a moment. So on the one side of the paper, you'll see a poem. On the other side is these questions. And we're not going to discuss them really. It's really for you to do individually. And as we're going through things, you might take notes about something about your own life. If there's some questions that don't make sense to you, you can skip them. Just the ones that help you, use them and try to process. So it starts out looking at the last few years, what's been good, what's been bad. It's important to realize that and not to deny that there have been bad things, not to deny that there have been good things. And then also to look in the next few years what you think is going to be good, what you think is going to be bad. And then the rest I just put under the present. Are you struggling with age transitions? Any answer is fine. How can your age transitions draw you closer to God? What should you carry from the past? So these are things that you don't want to change, because not everything changes as you make a transition, right? What changes should you initiate? So what things should you want to change? And then there's some things that with all age transitions, there's some things that are just inevitable and you just need to accept it, need to embrace it. It's not something you initiate, but you just need to go with it and find happiness in that. Do you have peers helping in your age transitions? So people your age that you're going through this with? What about mentors, people who are a step ahead of you that have been doing it well and you admire something about them and you're asking them, how do I adjust to this? Because you've just been through it. And are you being that mentor for someone else? And stereotypes. Sometimes we struggle with stereotypes. What stereotypes might you be struggling with about your current age transition? Sometimes when everyone tells you, at this age you're going to go through this, how do you respond? Sometimes you just give in and you say, okay, I'll just go through it because that's what I'm supposed to do. Other times you overreact and you say, no, I'm going to do the opposite. Neither one is really healthy, right? We need to look to God for our direction and process what those stereotypes are and how they affect us.
Just something about those stereotypes. Like, I know my teenagers, they are constant. Like, I had asked her last night. She was, we were talking to her about this, and she said, whenever people talk to me about how, you're a teenager, and and they make all these assumptions about me, and she said, I just hate that, And we have a young adult living with us right now, and she said she has a lot of stereotypes about millennials that she finds herself really fighting against. That there are a lot of, especially maybe people from other generations, who think, all millennials are, and they, fill in the blank here. And she finds herself kind of overcompensating, fighting against that really hard so that she doesn't fall into stereotypes, And so sometimes those stereotypes can make a difference to how we feel about our own age and our own stage of life and how we act in it. So I think he's gone to get more copies. So I guess transition from childhood to adulthood. We don't have time to talk about every transition
how'd you do that?
Has to do with aging. There's so many. And,
Thank you so much.
But we wanted to hit this one because I feel like it's a really big one, where people go from very dramatic change from one stage to another. And it does happen gradually over time, and for different people it happens at different times. And not everybody experiences it the same way, and I think that's important for us to all understand that everybody is going to have that transition in a different way, depending on their family, depending on their personality, their circumstances. But just like how with every transition, there's going to be an ending, there's going to be some things that are ending, some habits, some frames of mind, some things about your circumstances that are going to end. And there's going to be a neutral zone where you're not really sure what's happening. And that's a great time to seek God. And then there's going to be a beginning where you realize this is something, a new stage that I'm ready to invest in, and I'm ready to make work for my life. And so those transition stages happen with age transitions, just like they do with moving or with other things like that. That with the transition from childhood to adulthood, what kinds of things might be ending there?
You have to put away your toys or you have to get more serious about what you're going to do next.
Okay, you don't get to play so much. Okay.
I think they're just less desirable as part of the natural transition. I don't think anyone says you shouldn't play with those anymore.
Right. Okay, so maybe you just don't want to play anymore. Right. Okay.
As we go to the transition.
Okay.
There's a loss of innocence. You're awoken to the real world. And
Okay, a loss of innocence.
bills and hard stuff.
Right. There's so responsibility. Suddenly the things that you didn't have to be responsible for before, now you're having to be responsible for them.
When you say child to adult, would that be work? Like, what age are you talking about? I'm thinking like 6 to 7.
Well, the transition takes time. Okay, so that transition may happen over a number of years. And I think for different people it might be different. But I feel like once you hit adulthood, then that's when you are responsible for your own decisions and your own well-being. And you're responsible for making some kind of contribution to society in some way. Yeah, okay, there's a Bible verse that talks about putting away childish things.
And I would just add that we're just trying to kind of pick one little place to focus on as an example of how to deal with the transition, but really each person's transition is going to be different.
Right.
And so think of this more as one example of how we might approach an age transition, not that we're trying to really specify something that applies necessarily to everybody in the room. Yeah.
Right. So I had 3 things here that might be ending for a person who's going from childhood to adulthood. A dependence on parents for financial support or for decision making, and also having parents as your secure base that are there for you like every day. A lot of people maybe move out or they're not seeing their parents as much. And so they don't necessarily have that sense of security that comes from just being with their parents all the time. But what might not be ending, and this is like in 2 weeks we're going to talk about relationship transitions. And I wanted to do it after this class because I feel like these age transitions have a lot to do with some of our relationship transitions. Because the relationship with your parents isn't ending, right? It's just changing. That you're going to have a different relationship, just like you are going through a transition. Your relationship is going through a transition. And so some of those habits are going to end that you had with your parents before, and there's going to be a new relationship that's born, a beginning of a new relationship. But also friendships and our personality. And what we were as children, we do take into adulthood. It's not like a clean break. Like our values, our coping mechanisms, the love that we've had in childhood, all of that contributes to who we become as an adult. Wanted to talk about, you remember these disses from the endings class, I hope. All of these things that you experience during a transition. Disengagement, physical removal. For a lot of people, they're going to be away from their school that they've been a part of. They're going to be away from maybe their family if they move away. They might be away from their church family that they've had all of their lives. And so that's a physical removal that is part of the transition process.
That's a transition. The big transition for parents as well as the children.
It's a huge transition for parents, and we will talk about that in a couple of weeks as well. Dismantling, getting rid of the old habits and systems that won't work anymore. How you got your laundry done all your life might not work anymore as an adult. And so there are some old habits, the old ways of doing things, that have to change. And so there's a dismantling of how you maybe even how you woke yourself up. I remember when Marcus was in college, he would say, my parents don't even know how I get up in the morning now that I'm not with them. But he had to, because his mom always woke him up every morning. And so that's something that like he had to dismantle that way of waking up and create a new way. Disidentification, letting go of how you saw yourself and your place in your family, church, or social group. You know, as a teenager or as a youth, you have a certain way of identifying yourself within a church family or within your family. You know, we have teenagers, they know what class they're going to go to when they get to church. They know what section of the congregation they're going to sit in. They know that they are part of the youth group. This is how they identify themselves as part of our church. And then they graduate from high school. Right? What class do they go to? Where do they sit? Do they still sit with the youth group? Well, they're not really that, you know, they're not really considered part of that anymore. Does that make sense? So there's going to be this disidentification process that happens.
That's a real huge step with our young people going from that, you got all these plans, we're going to do this, that, and the other thing, and goodbye, figure it out on your own.
Right, exactly. And so, yeah, for the youth group, like they know where they're going to be on Wednesday nights. They have something for every, once a month on a Tuesday. It's all these things that are planned for them. And then all of a sudden, they have to find their own place in a congregation. And who am I? Now I'm an adult in the congregation. How do I fit, right? And so there's this disidentification process that goes where they're letting go of how they saw themselves. There can be some disorientation, some feeling of lostness, and that's okay, as we've talked about before. That can increase our faith in God. That can bring us closer to Him. There can be some disenchantment, and I wanted to talk about that because I feel like as a church family, this is something that we need to be prepared for and that we need to recognize it can happen, okay? People, when they come into adulthood, often question things that they have always assumed to be true. It's not going to happen for everybody, maybe, all right? But for some people, that's going to be part of their transition into adulthood. And so that's normal. I know that I went through it. Marcus went through it. And exploring doubts can make our faith stronger. Uh-huh.
I think kids that are going out into the world, and kids that are going to college,
Uh-huh.
when that questioning comes, they don't go to church as much.
I think
They may
sometimes
not
that's
look
true.
for a church.
I think sometimes that's true. Did you have anything you wanted to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, it is true that sometimes they don't go to church, and we pray and that God will lead them, and I know He will lead them to be part of His community, right? His community of humans that He's building. And I definitely believe that evaluating our faith will lead to a stronger faith and will lead us to really be productive and useful members of the community of faith. And if we avoid evaluating and exploring our doubts, that's when we're likely to fall by the wayside. I think that that truth, God is truth, and if people are looking for truth, they're going to find God. And so it's important that we help them to do that, and that we do it as part of the community. That as your next thing say, that the church be a safe place for emerging adults to express doubt, ask questions, and for there to be dialogue between generations, and for us all to work together in doing that.
I know for us, when we were asking lots of questions about, is the Bible really, can we trust the Bible? Is God really good? A lot of questions like that. We knew what adults we could talk to about those and what adults we couldn't. Jim, do you want to say something there?
Yeah, I just want to applaud he's not injured. Tucker's not injured, right?
Yeah, you can say something nice about him. He's not here.
No, I'm going to say something nice.
Yeah.
I don't want him to do. So I really applaud Gary. He launched about 3 years ago the Ignite group, which was basically a place for kids that are, college age,
Mhm,
whatever their situation was. And some were kids that grew up in this church, some were just kids that were going to college school, Mines or Red Rocks or whatever. And to provide exactly all these things here, and there's just this dynamic, and I don't know, this wouldn't be true for every kid, but I have my contention is that every young person that's kind of in this transition needs somebody that's not their parents to just dialogue and to question. It's like just exactly the safe place to just vent and what about this? And there's nothing wrong with the adults who raised them. Their parents are fine, but
Right.
there's just they're too the biology is too close or something like that. And so again, I applaud Gary, and I think that we have this even beyond just sort of that formal thing where kids, not all of them, but kids have their places, and I'd like us to take that to the next level where every kid has a mentor, has their go-to person,
Right.
one-on-one, in
Yeah.
addition to things like Ignite and beyond. So.
Yeah, that's good to have mentors.
So for my wrapping up statement,
Yeah.
I'll say I feel like one thing I like about this slide is it reminds us that part of every transition is God, and the most important part. And that's the most important part of transitioning from childhood to adulthood, whatever that may mean, is it's got to be about God. God is the answer for the world today. We can't have an answer without God. And we need as young people growing up, we need to really, sorry, I don't mean to say we, but young people growing up need to find how God can direct and guide their future so that they can really make the impact that needs to be made. Anyone missed this handout? Everyone's got it? Anyone needs a pen? All right, we'll hand it over to Jack. And we're thankful that he is helping teach this class, and we'll be sitting on the front row. Oh, you've got something already.
I got something already, but I need some props here.
Can I help with anything?
No, I was just thinking how embarrassing it would be if I fell down the steps.
Oh, when you're done with your pen, please return them.
I'll just rest that there. Well, they wanted to have somebody who could talk about aging. I really don't know very much about that. I was not a good candidate to get married. I was one of 3 boys. My mom didn't dare act very feminine if she were going to survive. And my dad was very dad-like. You can interpret that any way you want. And then came this era in college, and then all of a sudden, now those things have changed for some reason. People don't get married in college anymore, but when we went to college, you better get married or something wrong with you. If you didn't come out of there married, you blew it. So I went to Abilene Christian because that was where my dad went. That's where my older brother went. I fit in fairly well down there, and I began to date girls, and then I ran across Nani, and then I chased for the next several months and maybe a year. I would get a date, and then I'd finally ask her, about maybe another couple of weeks. She said, well, I'm sorry, I'm busy. And maybe I could get 3 months later, I could get back on the schedule again. So I was not very equipped to deal with aging in marriage. And I focus on that a lot here now because I don't know how long have you all been married?
Oh my God. 16 years.
Pardon?
16 years.
Oh, I can't go too far. 16 years?
Yeah.
Anybody beat that?
35.
35?
36.
35?
36.
36?
Okay, Nani, go ahead.
Yeah, 59 years ago, she gave in. And there have been times that she probably had dreaded that mistake. I was not an easy person to live with. You know, when I read passages in the scripture today, God created women after he'd created everything else. It was all done. Adam came, named all the things that he'd created, but then God saw that there was a missing link. It isn't something that he had failed to think about. I mean, omniscience doesn't have afterthoughts. This was the special part of creation. He saw that it was not good for man to be alone. And so he created woman. And that world became a mystery for a lot of us guys. I read some of the passages in various translations of the scripture that just dazzled me. In 1 Peter chapter 3, let me find it. No, that's not what I want. Chapter 3, I said. Got to read this. All right. It says, if you are a wife, you must put your husband first. Even if he opposes our message, you will win him over by what you do. No one else will have to say anything to him, because he will see how you honor God and live a pure life. Let me tell you, you learn to see a lot of things. We got into the bearing children stage of life, and that was exciting for us. It was a plan. We wanted to have children. It wasn't an afterthought. And we had one, went really well. Things were going great. We had the second one, and we lost him. We lost him. I'll never forget those days. I knew that he was born with some weakness, but he was in an incubator, and we could go and we could look at him. But we were, I didn't really have any big concern. Everything was going to be okay. I didn't take Mark, our son at that time, who was about 2, I didn't take him to go see the baby until I was sure things were going to be okay. And about the third night, about 2 o'clock in the morning, I got a call from the doctor. He said, you better get over here. Your baby is dying. And I got there and I met with the doctor, and he explained it to me. Then I had to go up to Nani's room and tell her. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. We tried to have a funeral, but we were just going to do a graveside. It was in January, and the weather got too bad. And the people from our church came to me, our preacher and elders, and they said, Jack, we're going to do a service inside because it's too cold to try to get people to go out there for a graveside. And I found Nani, and I tried to explain it to her. And we decided, what do we do? Okay, whatever they think's best. But we were not prepared for that. And there was a casket, and there he was. And something happened as you looked at that little baby. There was sort of a peace began to come over me because he looked so beautiful. He looked so good. And we'd lie in bed and cry. I began at that stage of my maleness to learn how a mom feels, how a woman deals with things. And I had a big gap to cover. But it gave us more strength in our love for each other than any single thing could have ever happened. And when we think of Jeff and what he would be today, we're just thankful we know where he is. It was immediate. That was the first consoling thought. So we reached then the other, we had Kathy, and then we had Mike, and then they all left. The empty nest took over. And everybody worried about that. But we sort of thought, hey, this isn't too bad. I mean, we could eat whenever we wanted to eat. It didn't have to be special. If we just decided just to have a bacon and egg sandwich for dinner, that was okay. We didn't have all these other 3 mouths to satisfy. And I found us focusing a lot more on each other than we ever had. But as you age, things take place. Couples begin to face different crises. Sometimes there are transitions. Some writers speak to them as passages. But there are too many middle-aged husbands and wives who suddenly find themselves worlds apart. He may be because he finally got into the occupation that he wanted and was going pretty well, but it wasn't near what he had dreamed it was going to be, and his satisfaction begins to wane, and he gets a little bit disturbed about the length of time he's going to do this. And how's he going to stay enthused about it? And others are outdoing him, and they're hiring younger people to take places that he thought someday he'd have. And moms who had given themselves all those years to developing their children and their personalities and their self-worth may suddenly find themselves, who am I? I'm no longer here as a mom. And people tell me, I thought about it when you guys were talking this morning. People say, well, Jack, your children are grown and gone. I say, your children may be grown. They're never gone. And those relationships that you have become more complicated, especially when they get married to somebody else that wasn't even one of your children and was raised in an entirely different environment than your kids were. And you're supposedly the authority. It doesn't fly, but you struggle with it. And you begin to see that as one of your greater challenges. And yeah, we talk about the kids today, and I was thinking in my heart, Jim, when we were talking about the kids that grow up, and boy, you guys painted the picture clearly. All of a sudden, they've come through all of this tutoring and fellowshipping and loving and caring about, and they graduate from high school. Where do they go? Most often, they don't come back. They go somewhere. because we've never provided anything for that. And as an elder for many years, one of the things I became most concerned about, we're to be shepherds of the flock. And most of those kids couldn't tell you one elder who they are. They've never had that kind of communication with an elder. And the shepherd becomes sort of a distant, wonder what that is relationship. And churches have been careless about that. And we need to struggle with that, because our kids are vitally important to us. Well, as you go on in your life, sometimes there are passages that take place. Women enter the midlife, and now they don't have to do all those things that they had to do, and they can get involved in some other things now, and they really get freed from being the person that always has to be there. You know, Dad was traveling on his job. Some dads are gone a lot. I had periods of time where I was in my business. We sat down and we talked about it. I said, how many nights can I be away and you handle it? And she said, 3. And I said, okay. So I'd go in the office on Monday morning and I'd work all day in the office. I would fly out Monday evening to whatever state I had to go to. I'd be gone Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night. I flew back home on Thursday. And we followed that pattern for several years. And it worked for us. But the key is I had to care what really mattered for her, what made it better for her, what could she handle. And we learned to communicate with each other, because I wasn't very good at that. Nani had a lot of adjusting to do to get this guy's attention. But I see those things happen now. Then that freedom that she has is compared with her husband, who suddenly realizes, wow, I've reached the top rung on the ladder that I'm ever going to reach. I'm not going to get any higher. You were so motivated getting there, but you hit the plimsoll point and it all stops right there. And you become aware of it. And that's a depressing thing for too many men. While the wife, in her freedom, is getting involved in things that she's never been involved in before. And she's having a great time. And he's wondering, what about us? And sometimes those crises that couples face create disaster and all the bad things that should never have happened. You know, when I've performed many marriages in my life. When I stand before a young couple and I have them repeat the vows and I listen to what they're saying, and I'm thinking in the back of my mind, you don't have a clue what you just said I do. I promise to this, I promise to that, in this situation, in that, better, worse, sickness, health. And they're just so bright-eyed. Can't wait to get into bed. What a gap. What a gap takes place. Prayer was mentioned this morning. And I assure you, prayer is a big part of our lives. We never does a day go by that we don't pray together. We started this clear back when we were living in Abilene. And I was coaching there. But we finally decided, I was always the one, we go to bed, I'd say a prayer. And I finally decided she needs to pray. So we finally figured out, okay, we got a formula now. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, my wife first. So she gets 3, I get 4. But I love to listen to her pray, and every night, that's the way we end. When we crawl into bed at night and we hold each other close, and we pray. And then, when the lights are turned off, and I reached over and I get a hold of her hand, and I say, I love you. And she says, I love you. Those are the last words that we hear from each other every night. And I cherish those words because I know it's true. We have great love for each other. And whatever we face now, we don't know. We don't know what the health conditions we're going to have to deal with. God has been gracious to us. We haven't had anything serious. I got a brother that's younger than me, and his wife is in a mental hospital, has Alzheimer's. And it's so sad to see what has happened in their lives. We don't know what we have to face. But we know this, we'll face it together. And as we go and head for the 60th year, we're in that year right now of our marriage. It's the greatest blessing that ever happened in my life, bar none. And it's because of her. And because God said it wasn't good for Jack to be alone. And I'm not. And I pray you aren't. I pray that your marriages will thrive as you realize how deeply committed God intended for us to be when we say all those promises that we said to each other. I do. And it goes on the finger. Thank you for being here and for letting me just share some of the things that we're experiencing in our life. We're ready for whatever comes. God will take care of us. Thank you. I want you to note, you had this on thing that I had asked that this be handed out this morning. I just want to read it to you. It's not positive. The wall. Their wedding picture mocked them from the table, these two whose minds no longer touched each other. They lived with such a heavy barricade between them that neither battering ram of words nor artilleries of touch could break it down. Somewhere between the oldest child's first tooth and the youngest daughter's graduation, they lost each other. Throughout the years, each slowly unraveled that tangled ball of string called self. And as they tugged at stubborn knots, each hid his searching from the other. Sometimes she cried at night and begged the whispering darkness to tell her who she was. He lay beside her, snoring like a hibernating bear, unaware of her winter. Once, after they had made love, he wanted to tell her how afraid he was of dying, but fearing to show his naked soul, he spoke instead about her physical beauty. She took a course in modern art, trying to find herself in colors splashed upon a canvas, and complained to other women about men who were insensitive. One day, reaching out to touch each other, they found a barrier they could not penetrate, and recoiling from the coldness of the stone, each retreated from the stranger on the other side. For when love dies, it is not in a moment of angry battle, nor when fiery bodies lose their heart. It lies panting, exhausted, expiring at the bottom of a wall it could not scale. Don't let that happen to you. God bless you. Yes, ma'am.
When you were talking about the wedding vows, I thought of this, I said, what does it say, love, honor, and communicate? Communicate, honor. Now, that may not make that person, quote, communicate, but it could always bring them, one of the two could always come back to, remember our vows? You, whatever the word is, you promised to communicate through, I can't remember all the vowels, but blah, blah, blah. Wouldn't that be good to have that word in there?
Certainly.
Because I think that is the biggest hindrance or breakdown in relationships, whether it be marriage or any other.
Thank you, Carrie.
Well, let's change. Who's got the authority?
Thank you so much, Jack. It's always so good to hear from you. And we just wanted to mention that next week we're going to have some special various speakers telling their transition stories. And so we'll have several different people telling different kinds of transition stories. And so we hope that you'll enjoy that. And then the following week is a class on relationships and transition, because anytime one person in a relationship has a transition, then the relationship transitions. If you have a friend that gets married, then your relationship changes with that friend because of their transition, right? And so we're going to talk about how transitions affect relationships. And then after that, we're going to have a class on work transitions. And so just so that you know what's happening over the next month or so. And thanks for being here. And that's for people who do not have a workplace also. People like me who are gadabouts as our job. So, all right, thank you.